Steven Spielberg and Harrison Ford made magic in films together. From Raiders of the Lost Ark to E.T., it looked like they could do no wrong. But a storm was building up behind the scenes. It began with disagreements about how to make art, got worse with Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and finished with silence. Today, we find out the shocking reason Spielberg never forgiven Ford and why they haven't talked since. Steven Spielberg was born in Cincinnati, Ohio, on December 18, 1946. His family was Jewish and had deep roots in Ukraine. Arnold, his father, was an electrical engineer who worked on early computers. Leah, his mother, was a stage pianist who later opened her own restaurant. Each of them came from a family of Jewish people who had left Ukraine and came to America. Their stories of escape would later influence Spielberg's films. His life was not at all stable. The family moved all the time because of his dad's job. They went from Cincinnati to New Jersey and then to Arizona. I had to start over every time I moved, and it was even harder as the only Jewish kid in a neighborhood where most of the kids were not Jewish. His family's strict practices made him feel bad, and school wasn't any better. That was made sure of by bullies. They threw pennies at him, called him names, and even wrote mean things on his locker. Some of his friends would sneeze at him when they went by. It was mean. He didn't like being noticed. To keep from being picked on, he started telling people his last name was German instead of Jewish at one point. He felt bad about that for a long time, up until he got older and saw that it was something to be proud of. One thing made him feel alive through it all: making films. It began when he was 12 years old. To get a Boy Scout photography award, he used his dad's 8mm camera to make a short Western movie called The Last Gunfight. There wasn't much to the project, but something about it worked. It made him happy. He was hooked. By age 13, he had gotten away from everything. A 40-minute war movie based on stories his father told him about World War II. He didn't have any fancy tools, so he made do. The film won first place in a statewide competition by using flour-filled boards to make blasts look real. In a way, it was his first taste of fame. He got even bigger when he was 17. Firelight was his first full-length movie that he directed, a sci-fi story about meeting aliens. Even though the budget was only $500, he made it work by doing clever things like layering exposures to add glowing spaceships to the picture. It was hard, but the themes of mystery, wonder, and broken families were there. He first showed Firelight at a local theater. It was the start of the kinds of stories he would later perfect in films like Close Encounters of the Third Kind, putting up tickets for $1 each. After selling 500 tickets, he added up the money and saw that he had made a profit of $1. Spielberg saw it as proof that people would come to see something he had made, even though it wasn't much. Steven Spielberg got his start in Hollywood with a short movie he made in 1968 called Amblin. It was 26 minutes long and had no speech. That student film wasn't just any movie. It was the key that opened the doors to Hollywood for him. Spielberg made a simple but highly symbolic movie about a young man and woman hitchhiking through the Mojave Desert in the 1960s with only $15,000 to work with. Intimate and quiet parts of the movie slowly show a deeper message. The man seems carefree at first, but the things in his guitar case, like a shirt, deodorant, and toothpaste, show that he's not really as carefree as he acts. People who saw it and people who reviewed it both liked this subtle comment on identity and societal standards. How Spielberg made Amblin work is what makes it even more interesting. He was only 21 years old when he directed it, and he decided to use 35mm film, which was risky and cost a lot for someone who was just starting out. Instead of speech, the movie used expressive cinematography and music to tell its story visually and make the audience feel something. This showed how good Spielberg was at telling stories with just a camera. The effects of Amblin were felt right away. A top executive at Universal Television named Sidney Sheinberg saw the movie and liked it so much that he offered Spielberg a 7-year contract to make films. Steven Spielberg was the youngest director to sign such a deal. He was only 22 years old, worked with a big company. He thought about the name Amblin a lot. After many years, he used it for his production company, Amblin Entertainment, which made famous films like E.T. and Back to the Future. After signing the deal with Universal, Spielberg got better by directing TV shows. In 1971, he directed the first episode of Columbo called Murder by the Book. This was one of his first big jobs. He gave the police show an unforgettable Hitchcockian look at just 24 years old by using creative camera angles and a fast-paced, suspenseful style. The episode became one of the most well-known in the series and showed that Spielberg could make TV shows feel like movies. But Spielberg really made it big with Duel, a made-for-TV movie that went viral later that same year. Duel is a movie about a traveling seller. It's based on a short story by Richard Matheson, who was being chased by an unknown truck driver on a lonely highway. Even though it sounds easy, Spielberg turned it into a scary drama. He used low-angle shots to make the truck look like a huge monster, and the sound design made the stress almost unbearable. Duel looked and felt like a full-length movie, even though it was made for TV. This is why it was shown in theaters in Europe. The movie did well at the box office and earned Spielberg praise as one of Hollywood's most interesting new directors. Steven Spielberg, a kid of 28 years old, changed Hollywood forever. No one saw that coming, but he did that very thing with Jaws in 1975. What began as a simple movie about a killer shark became a huge hit at the box office and changed the way films are made forever. Before Jaws, movies didn't have huge openings across the country, and summer wasn't even thought of as a good time for movies. When Spielberg's scary movie Great White Shark came out, it became the first movie in U.S. history to make $100 million. It kept going. Jaws made an amazing $470 million around the world by the end of its run. But now comes the crazy part. This movie almost didn't work. The artificial shark didn't work at all. It kept falling apart, making it look more like a bathtub on water than a dangerous animal. Spielberg did something brave instead of scrapping the movie. He didn't show the shark very much. Instead, he used music and tension to make the audience feel like they were there. This is where John Williams' scary two-note theme came in. Just two easy notes, done and done, immediately caused fear. Spielberg later said it was like Alfred Hitchcock's films, where fear comes from what you don't know, not what you see on the screen. What really changed things about Jaws was how it was released, not the scares. Movies didn't come out in hundreds of theaters at once back then. Studios would try them out in a few places and then spread them to more cities if they did well. It was Universal who changed the story. At the time, they were crazy and spent $700,000 on TV ads. On the same day, Jaws was shown in 409 theaters. As a result, right away, hype. There were lines around the block, and that was the start of the summer blockbuster. The company also made money by selling t-shirts, toys, and even swimming fins. It looked like Hollywood had found a gold mine with Jaws, but it did more than just make money. Films will never be the same again. Before this, the most popular films were ones with rich, character-driven plots, made by artists who were rebellious. Studios learned after Jaws that big, exciting, high-concept films could bring in huge crowds. It was the start of a new age in Hollywood where spectacle was just as important as story. The movie got 3 Academy Awards, was put in the National Film Registry, and is still one of Spielberg's most famous works. Spielberg had taken over Hollywood with Jaws, but he was still not done. After 2 years, he went even bigger with Aliens. He made Close Encounters of the Third Kind in 1977, which was very different from other sci-fi films at the time. There were a lot of stories about aliens during the Cold War, but Spielberg chose a different path. His aliens were not scary monsters from space. Instead, they were strange and even peaceful. The story was about Roy Neary, everyday guy whose life changes completely when he sees UFOs. He becomes more and more obsessed with them, which takes him on a trip that makes him question everything he knows. In a way, it showed something about Spielberg, who was crazy about telling stories that changed the way people saw the world. The movie looked better than its time. Special effects master Douglas Trumbull made scenes that were amazing, like the scene where the alien mothership comes down, glowing with a light from another world. It wasn't just about the pictures, though. Spielberg really knew how to make a movie great. Instead of making it hard for humans and aliens to talk to each other, he added something powerful: music. A simple 5-note tune by John Williams became a language that both species could understand. This tune became quickly famous, just like Jaws' 2-note scary theme. The movie was more than just a show. It had real emotional weight. Roy Neary's trip wasn't just about finding aliens. It had to do with passion, finding new things, and the unknown. After many years, Spielberg said that he would have written Roy differently if he had been a dad at the time. Roy leaves his family behind to go after the aliens in the movie. He was 30 years old at the time, wanting to know more. After many years, when he was a father, he had a new perspective. Close Encounters, which came out the same year as Star Wars, showed that sci-fi could be both smart and hugely popular. More than $300 million was made on it, and Spielberg was nominated for his first Academy Award for Best Director. The movie got an Oscar for its beautiful cinematography and paved the way for even better sci-fi films, like Spielberg's E.T. after a few years. Steven Spielberg and George Lucas were taking it easy on a beach in Hawaii in 1977. Lucas's Star Wars movie was just out, and Spielberg was daydreaming about making a James Bond movie. Lucas had a better idea, though. He thought of Indiana Smith, an archaeologist who was brave and found treasure. Spielberg liked it, but he thought Smith's voice was too simple. "I think we should call him Indiana Jones." That was the birth of one of Hollywood's biggest stars. Once the name was decided, the real work started. To bring Indiana Jones to life, Lucas, Spielberg, and author Lawrence Kasdan worked together to make a story around the man of adventure. They wanted the movie to be fast-paced, dangerous, and full of excitement, like the old action films from the 1930s and 1940s. Indy's first treasure hunt should be the Ark of the Covenant, which is what director Philip Kaufman recommended. Raiders of the Lost Ark was almost ready to go when 1980 came around. There was just one big problem. Who would play Indiana Jones? Tom Selleck was put forward instead of Harrison Ford as the first choice. He even got the part. But just as things were coming together, Selleck had to back out because he had to work on the TV show Magnum P.I. They needed a new Indy right away. Spielberg thought of Ford right away, but Lucas wasn't sure. Ford had already been cast as Han Solo in Star Wars, so he didn't want to become his go-to guy. But Ford got the part in the end because he promised to make Indy his own, and he did. In Tunisia, Ford had one of his most famous on-set moments. In the plot, Indiana and a master swordsman were supposed to fight very hard, but Ford was sick with dysentery and too tired to do the long choreographed scene. He asked Spielberg, "Why don't I just shoot the guy?" because he was angry. That made Spielberg laugh and agree. The result was one of the funniest and most famous scenes in movie history, which wasn't planned at all. Ford didn't just play Indiana Jones at first. He turned into him. Spielberg trusted him to make the role his own, and it paid off. Since it came out on June 12, 1981, Raiders of the Lost Ark has been a huge hit. People couldn't get enough. It made $389 million around the world, showing that action films were still alive and well. Steven Spielberg directed Raiders of the Lost Ark, Temple of Doom, The Last Crusade, and Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, which are the first 4 Indiana Jones pictures. The mood of each movie was different. Raiders of the Lost Ark was the first action movie ever made. Part of the reason Temple of Doom was darker was that both Spielberg and Lucas were having a rough time in their personal lives. Then, Sean Connery played Indy's father in The Last Crusade, which made things more fun by showing how bad their relationship was. He thought of it as a story about dads and kids, so it wasn't just another action movie. Spielberg wasn't even sure he wanted to make Kingdom of the Crystal Skull when the chance came up. He only agreed because he loved the role and worked hard for Lucas. But Spielberg didn't come up with Indiana Jones all by himself. It was also Harrison Ford's. Ford wasn't sure at first if he wanted to play the part. He was afraid that Indy might feel like Han Solo all over again. He changed the character with Spielberg and Lucas's help. Smarter, tougher, and most of all, personal. Ford didn't want Indy to be a hero that no one could hurt. In order to solve his problems, he had to work hard, get hurt, and think, not just fight his way through them. Ford insisted on playing an older Indiana Jones in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull the same way he was in real life. Everything, gray hair, lines, and wrinkles. He did not want to act like Indy was still the same age. It was important to him that people saw that even old heroes can still go on adventures. Spielberg had full faith in Ford and even let him do many of his own moves. It cost a lot to trust them. Ford was hurt a lot. He tore his ACL when a plane flew over his leg in Raiders. He hurt his back so badly in Temple of Doom that he had to have surgery, but he wouldn't let a trick double do the work. All of the cuts and limps were real, and they made Indy feel real too. Behind the scenes, things did not always go as planned. In Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, there was one of the biggest fights. In the story, George Lucas was crazy about the idea of aliens. Sony and Ford were not pleased. Ford even told Lucas, "There's no way I'm being in a Steven Spielberg movie like that." Also, Spielberg wasn't sure because he had already made E.T. and Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Lucas wouldn't give up, though. They found a middle ground by saying that the aliens were from an old story instead of being little green men from space. Even though fans were still split, Spielberg had done what he could. Even though the story was sad, he made it seem like an Indiana Jones movie. Also, Harrison Ford is more than just Indiana Jones or Han Solo. He's also the reason E.T., the alien event, even took place the way it did. However, a lot of people don't even know how important he was behind the scenes. Steven Spielberg filmed Raiders of the Lost Ark in Tunisia in 1980. He was also thinking about another story, this one about an alien who got lost and a boy who was alone. He had a plan to make it, but there was a catch. He didn't have a plan. Then there was a lucky accident. At the time, Ford was seeing Melissa Matheson, who was on set. She wrote great screenplays, and The Black Stallion made her famous. Spielberg saw a chance and told her about E.T., thinking she would write the script. She said no, though. She had taken a break from screenwriting because it was too hard for her. Spielberg didn't give up easily. He asked Ford for help. Ford jumped in because he knew Spielberg really believed in this story. In the end, he got Matheson to agree to try again. Thus, Spielberg put it forward once more, this time with more feeling and heart. It worked. She changed her mind right there in the desert of Tunisia. One of the most famous scripts in Hollywood history came from that choice. She did an amazing job of capturing Spielberg's vision, and her work got her nominated for an Oscar. E.T. might not have been made without Ford. However, Ford's role did not end there. He was in the movie too, but you haven't seen it. He was cast by Spielberg as Elliot's school director. The scene happened after Elliot's biology class act, where he saved a frog. Ford's character scolds Elliot about being responsible, but he has no idea that Elliot is floating in his chair thanks to his psychic relationship with E.T. But here's the catch. Spielberg didn't show Ford's face. He kept the story from the point of view of a child, so adults were only there to add background noise. Still, the scene was cut after all that. He thought it slowed down the movie, so even one of the biggest stars in Hollywood couldn't get out of the editing room. The video was kept secret for years and only came out in special versions later on. Henry Thomas, the young actor who played Elliot, will never forget meeting Ford on the set. Steven Spielberg could not be stopped in the 1990s. He was great at both special effects and telling rich, emotional stories, which shows that a director could be good at both show and substance. It all began with Jurassic Park in 1993. When Spielberg used computer-generated images, CGI, for the first time on this scale, he was taking a huge risk. He didn't just use CGI, though. He mixed it with animatronics to make the dinosaurs look real enough to scare people. In the scene with the T-Rex attack, for example, a 9,000-pound animatronic and CGI were mixed together so well that no one could tell the difference. Drawing one shot of the T-Rex in the rain took 6 hours, so it wasn't easy to make, but it was worth it. It broke all kinds of records and was the highest-grossing movie of all time at the time. It also got 3 Oscars for sound and visual effects. After just a few months, Spielberg made a full 180-degree turn and put out Schindler's List. He told one of the scariest real stories in history instead of CGI and action. The black-and-white movie was about a German businessman named Oskar Schindler who saved the lives of more than 1,100 Jews during the Holocaust. Spielberg shot on location in Krakow, Poland, and it broke his heart. But the outcome could not be denied. It made $322 million around the world, even though it only cost $22 million to make. Not only did it win 7 Oscars, but Spielberg also won Best Director for the first time. This was the moment when he was finally known as one of the best directors of all time, after years of making hits. By the end of the decade, Saving Private Ryan, 1998, put him back in the war. The opening scene of D-Day looked so real that real soldiers had flashbacks while they watched it. Spielberg used handheld cameras, took away all the color, and didn't use the usual Hollywood heroes. The movie showed Captain John Miller and his team looking for Private James Ryan, who was the last brother of a family that had died. Spielberg made sure everything was true to life because he was inspired by the real-life Nyland brothers. And to do that, players had to go through tough boot camp training at every step, and scholars were asked for their opinions. It made $482 million around the world, making it a huge hit. We saw Spielberg win Best Director at the Oscars again. Steven Spielberg began the 2000s by making science fiction films, but not just action films set in the future. He looked deeply into how people feel. AI, artificial intelligence, which came out in 2001, wasn't his original idea. Stan Lee had planned it for years, but he didn't think the technology was ready. In 1995, he gave it to Spielberg. After Kubrick's death in 1999, Spielberg took it and made it his own. The movie was about David, an android that was designed to love, and it made you think about what it means to be human. Spielberg made a movie that split people up because it mixed Kubrick's dark vision with his own personal stories. It made $236 million around the world, was nominated for 2 Oscars, and over time became known as one of his most daring works. Then there was Minority Report, 2002, which was based on a short story by Philip K. Dick. It wasn't just another science fiction movie. If crimes are stopped before they happen, the story looked at the conflict between free will and fate. The character played by Tom Cruise, John Anderton, is accused of a murder he hasn't done yet. Spielberg didn't just make a scary chase movie. He also got scientists to help him make the future seem real. The movie made $358 million around the world, showing that Spielberg could make a serious sci-fi movie a big hit. But he wasn't just good at writing about the future. He could also write very well about real events. Talked about Israel's secret plan to kill the people guilty for the 1972 Olympics massacre. Spielberg didn't make payback look good. Instead, he showed how it hurts people, how moral it is, and how violence keeps happening over and over again. The movie caused a lot of trouble, but it got 5 Oscar nods. Still, it wasn't a big hit at the box office. It only made $131 million around the world. In 2012, the movie Lincoln took viewers right back to the 1860s, when Abraham Lincoln fought to end slavery. Spielberg focused on Lincoln's political fights to get the 13th Amendment passed instead of making a broad history. Daniel Day-Lewis won an Oscar for how well he played Abraham Lincoln. 12 awards were given to the movie, which made more than $275 million, showing that a slow story with a lot of dialogue could still hold people's attention. He was still interested in history. In 2015, the movie Bridge of Spies brought the Cold War to life through the story of James B. Donovan, an insurance lawyer who helped set up a spy swap between the US and the USSR. Part of the script for the movie came from the Coen brothers. It was sharp, subtle, and powerful. 6 Oscars were given to it, and Mark Rylance won for his part as a Soviet spy as Best Supporting Actor. Then in 2017, Spielberg made The Post, a movie about news with Meryl Streep and Tom Hanks. The movie was mostly about the Pentagon Papers affair, but it also had some other things in it. It was about power, bribery, and the freedom of the press. Spielberg rushed it through production in just 9 months to make sure it came out at a time when it was politically important. It made $179 million and was nominated for Best Picture, which shows he could still touch people. Then, just when it looked like Spielberg would stick to telling important stories, he went back to making fun films. The 2018 movie Ready Player One was a love letter to video games, pop culture, and excitement. People avoid a bad future by going into virtual reality. The movie was full of references like Back to the Future and The Shining. Some critics said it was just flash and no content, but people loved it. It took visual effects to a whole new level and made $607 million around the world. But then something personal came up. Schauberg told his own story in The Fabelmans 2022. His childhood, how much he loves making films, and the problems his family is having. It didn't do very well at the box office, $45.6 million, but it hit hard. There were 7 Oscar nominations for this movie, including 1 for Best Picture. It won the People's Choice Award at the Toronto International Film Festival. You could see Spielberg at his most honest and open. It showed that he still had stories to tell after decades in Hollywood. There are 2 marriages, a big family, and a strong desire for Steven Spielberg to give back in his personal life. In 1985, he got married to actress Amy Irving, but the marriage didn't last long. They got a divorce in 1989 and had a son named Max. Spielberg had to pay a huge payment of $100 million, which was one of the biggest at the time. After a few years, he met Kate Capshaw while working on Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. They've been together for more than 30 years and got married in 1991. Their family is very big. Jeff and Theo were Capshaw's children from past relationships. Spielberg later adopted them. After that, they had 4 more kids together: Sasha, Sawyer, Michaela, who was adopted, and Destry. Spielberg wasn't sure about becoming a dad at first, but after making E.T., he changed his mind. He once said that being a dad and being a director were both the same. You were in charge of and shaped something bigger than yourself in both. His family always came first, even when he was busy. Kate, his wife, even quit acting to take care of the house. They call their marriage a partnership. Spielberg was in charge of the camera and the story, and she was in charge of the family. Spielberg felt he had to do more than just make films about history after Schindler's List. He was determined to keep it. He started the USC Shoah Foundation in 1994 to record the stories of Holocaust survivors. At first, it was only about people who had lived through the Holocaust. Later, it grew to include people who had lived through genocides in Rwanda, Armenia, and Cambodia. Over 56,000 survivor stories from 65 countries and 44 languages have been recorded by the organization. Spielberg thinks these stories show what hate can do and wants them to serve as a lesson to people in the future. Today, the organization also fights racism and anti-Semitism. He gave back in more ways than one, though. He started the Righteous Persons Foundation with the money he made from Schindler's List. This organization has given over $100 million to Jewish culture and social justice causes. He also set up the Wunderkinder Foundation, which gives money to projects in healthcare, education, the arts, and disaster aid. He gave $30 million to help suffering film workers get health insurance, a lot of money to help people who were hurt in Hurricane Katrina, and the idea to start the Starlight Children's Foundation to make sick kids happy. In 2022, when Russia attacked Ukraine, Spielberg and his wife gave $1 million to help people in need.